Mayor Muller,
Present.
Councilor Gerson,
Present.
Councilor Trask,
Present.
Councilor Gorley,
Present.
Councilor Coleman,
Present.
Councilor Sanchez, Councilor Richards,
Here.
Bob Brianna,
Present.
Derek Dix, David Loman,
Present.
Kenneth Hamlin,
Present.
Josh Dorsett.
Present. All right, so we'll do approval of minutes. So moved. Second. All right, then we do a public hearing on election to receive state revenue sharing funds.
Chair Forstead, we just need a vote on the.
Oh, yeah.
motion in second.
Yes. Roll call.
Mayor Muller,
Yes.
Councilor Gerson,
Yes.
Councilor Trask,
Yes.
Councilor Gorley,
Yes.
Councilor Coleman. Yes. Councilor Richards,
Yes.
Bob Brianna,
Yes.
David Loman,
Yes.
Kenneth Hamlin,
Yes.
Josh Dorsett.
Yes. All right, now. The public hearing on election to receive state revenue sharing funds. The public hearing will now open at 6:03. At this time, we will open the public for comment on the election to receive state revenue sharing funds. Anybody want to comment?
This is an opportunity for the public to give public testimony on the city's election to receive state revenue sharing funds. It's a requirement under state law that we hold a public hearing for any members of the public that wish to speak on the use of these funds. If there's no public comment, you can go ahead and close the public hearing and we can move on to the agenda.
Okay, is there no public comment? Online or anything?
Pardon?
Is there anybody online or anything? Huh?
There are people online, but they are not speaking on this topic.
All right, we'll close the public hearing at 6:04. Then we will review and discussion of proposed budget. All right, that's you.
I guess this is my turn. I hope you all have had a chance to flip through the document that is before you. Tonight, we're going to go through the sections or the funds. We're going to go through general fund, the public safety fund, library services, project and equipment reserve, the narcotics fund, and the internal service fund. Members or the department heads that are responsible for some of those budgets inside each of those areas are here if we have specific questions. But for the most part, I'm going to give you the highlights for each of those funds as we go through. I'll give you the page numbers so that you can follow along with us as we go. And certainly this is your time as budget committee members to ask questions and make sure you know what's in here and what you're voting on. So that said, I will kick off with the general fund. So
Could I
yes,
interject here?
Sure.
Mine's off.
it was on.
Oh, it was on. It's on going off on me.
It's on. See,
The
it's
green
green.
thing.
The green light indicates it's on.
Yeah, but then it went off
Yep, see, it's
because
green.
you pressed the button. Oh, I can't see the green.
Well,
Okay, anyway, I went back 4 years, well, not 4 years, but well, back to 17, 18, 19. My question would be, last year we had a budget and for 2021, grants, gifts and donations are supposed to be 9 million. But when I went to see the actual, it was only 3 million. Where'd the 9 million, the other 6 million go?
So a lot of that variance is due to the wastewater treatment plant. We budgeted for state revenues, a state grant that we did not end up receiving because we weren't ready to start that project. So that's the biggest variation.
All right, and there was one other, well, no, it's still guessing donation, so same, okay, that's the only thing I.
Okay. So we're gonna start with general fund. That begins in page 40 on page 47 of the budget book in front of you and goes through page. See if I can draw a straight line, 83. I'm gonna cover the general fund as a whole. What you have in those pages are some department breakdowns, in addition to the general fund summary. So if you have specific questions on any of the pages they're in, we can certainly talk about those as we go. The general fund, from those of you that are not new to this process, will remember. Those of you that are new, this is information for you. The general fund is our discretionary fund. It's purely the city's what do we want to do fund. Right now, what happens in that fund is the municipal court operations, community and economic development, which covers planning and building, as well as code compliance. One other, oh, it had some engineering staff in that as well. And then parks are in the general fund. There are some non-departmental expenditures as well. The biggest of them being the electricity costs for the streetlights throughout town. All of those light poles we don't own, but we do pay the electricity on them. So that's primarily what you'll find in the non-departmental fund, along with some smaller expenditures that don't generally belong to any one department. In the proposed budget for this year, in the general fund, we have removed 95% of the staff engineer who was previously budgeted in the community and economic development department. That 95% has been moved to the internal service fund, specifically the public works admin. We'll cover that when we get to that section. What is included in the general fund this year that hasn't been for the last 2 years is some executive expenses. The only executive expenses included this year are $83,000, which covers the costs of an agreement and separation with the former city manager. So that $83,000 is coming out of the general fund for the next fiscal year. We have budgeted $100,000 in total costs for the facility for the unsheltered. That includes $80,000 for nighttime security and $20,000 in capital costs to get utilities and other needs down to that location. In the general fund and in all of our funds, you will see electricity and natural gas costs. The budgets for those have increased 8%. That is due to rate increases being proposed by both of those organizations, utility organizations, to the Oregon Public Utilities Board. They are proposing higher percentages, but we are certainly hoping that they don't get that full amount and that we will see just the 8%. In the general fund for capital projects, we talked about the unsheltered facility. $20,000 in capital has been added for that component. We've budgeted $50,000 for city hall expenses. What we're doing there is initially the hookup of the generator. That if you've taken a stroll out back recently, you'll see this very large yellow generator sitting out there. It doesn't serve a useful purpose right now until it gets hooked up to our building. So we have budgeted some funds to get that hooked up. And then this facility will become an emergency operations center in the event that it becomes necessary. Anything left over will be used to do some office configuration changes within the building. Given where costs are at today, we're not sure that there will really be much left over, but we're going to do the best we can with that $50,000.
So Brandon, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Also on page 54, the bottom, which is, it shows the capital outlay and it shows $50,000 for buildings, and then it shows $170,000 for projects and improvements. What's the difference?
So the buildings is specifically for building upgrades, any capital construction or modifications to a building. Projects and improvements tends to cover things like, that 170,000 specifically is for parks money. So.
Oh, that's for
improvements
parks.
improvements in parks.
Specifically.
In other places, you'll see, for example, when we get to the water funds, tomorrow, there'll be projects and improvements, and that'll be like improving our water lines. But buildings is specifically whatever you're adding to, the value of a building.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Brandon, what is give me a little breakdown on the $50,000 for the buildings. Is that, give me. So we're gonna do some stuff inside the building?
The first thing we're gonna do is that generator.
Okay.
And that cost estimate is still kind of varying depending on who you talk to. But we're estimating that to get that hooked up is gonna, to situate it where it's supposed to be and get that hooked up to the building will cost us anywhere between $35,000 and $50,000.
Okay,
So it may get entirely eaten in solidifying that generator. But whatever is left, yes, we're gonna do some minor stuff inside.
okay. At some point, I want to know what that stuff inside is. I'll get with you on that, or you and Christie later. So,
Well, and for the budget committee's purpose, I think it's good for them to know that as well. The plan right now is to add a couple of office spaces. As our staff needs have changed, we've decided we need some additional offices specifically for the communications office. And then that kind of takes them out of what was originally honestly a closet in the original plans, gives them a little bit more space. It would take out a wall that currently exists between the communications office and the finance director's office. And then some minor modifications to the former city manager's office, which was relocated to make that a better conference room that will fit the needs of the community and staff.
well, I have a couple questions on that. I talked to Christie about that. I mean, is it absolutely necessary? I understand the size of one or two of those rooms. I do. But we have two places we can have this and right across the hallway here. I can't understand why we think we need another place to have people come and talk. I just don't understand that.
Sure.
But Legia's room is like a closet. I understand that. But I know that we put money in there before to pay for some of that. I think you did some of that.
In this year's
To a
budget,
degree,
but did
but
not
not
get
much.
completed.
I understand that. But I just think is what we want to do, is it that most important thing for us to do in the next fiscal year? I don't know, just you'll have to convince me, but
Sure.
that'd be my concern is that, I mean, the general fund's tight and,
Right.
and so it's kind of, anyway, okay, we're good, all right?
Just to go along here with Dave, have you written down how many times people have come in for meetings at any of these facilities? Like the one over there on the left, the one across the hall here, or here? Have you taken notice of when and where and how many?
So we do have a reservation process. We do have a reservation calendar that those conference rooms are booked. Right now, there's been a conversation and a desire for there to be an office space for counselors and the mayor to utilize. And the conference room over in the far corner, what is labeled as Ames conference room right now, the intent was for that to be for pre-apps when it was designed, so that folks could go in there, work on plans with building and planning divisions. That didn't work out because it's very small. But it's a good size for an office and for somebody to come in and have, for counselors or whomever to come in and have constituent meetings or have a place to meet. So right now, the going conversation is that we would convert that to an office space. That would leave us with one conference room and then this room. This room does get tied up at times with larger scale meetings. And certainly we have all the furniture in here but we have not, at this point, used this room on a super regular basis as far as conference type meetings. But we do use it for larger scale meetings like like this, council, city council, obviously. board meetings, stuff like that.
So in a year, how many reservations have you had?
To be honest, without looking, I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head.
That might help decide how to do things.
Well, and something to note is I have actually come into the building many times for meetings. And if the meeting runs over in here, we're diverted to the other one, which is actually kind of small when you have a meeting in there. And so sometimes the meetings are overlapping and it causes problems. And we need space for people to go if they've all come into this building to have a meeting, because otherwise we'd have to reschedule. So.
Well, I do get that, but that room over there is not any bigger than this room.
True.
Which
That room where the city manager used to be, it's not any bigger than
Sure,
this.
so it wouldn't be just that size. The conversation would be that we would bump that wall out, take over some of the storage space next door to make that a larger conference room, something that is more usable, more functionable for folks who need meeting space.
So you like to tear things up, is that what you're telling me?
I think certainly there is,
I'm done with it.
anybody who builds a building probably knows that you don't always necessarily get it right the first time. And certainly I think things have changed over the last 2 years, 3 years that we've been in this building. When we built this building, it was 2018, 2019, pre-COVID. Now we have a need for conference room space that does a lot more web meetings, camera functionality, TVs, the works. It's a different world, certainly, than when we built this 3 years ago. So we are trying to be diligent about what we have and trying to utilize the space that we have while trying to make some small changes to make it more functional. But certainly this is a budget proposal. And so as the budget committee, if the feeling is that those dollars can be better spent elsewhere, then that is certainly what the budget committee and the city council process is for.
Well, I think the generators are really high priority.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, we didn't buy it to have it sit out there.
Yeah.
Give you that. So I actually don't have anything further as far as the highlights for the general fund. So this is definitely just the question and answer period. If you have anything, I will highlight, I guess, the parks money. As far as the parks are concerned, the idea with those funds is to do a little bit of work at Hobart. And then we have the park space next door to this facility that needs to be built out next year. 2 dog parks, from what I understand. And I think some minor upgrades at North Side are on the agenda. So that's what that 170,000 would cover.
So I got one more question. I always ask this every year. So is $1,030 enough for travel and training?
In which line?
We're talking page 58. There's training and travel, $1,030.
So though that line is related to the parks budget, the code 100-009-452 is for parks. There are only 2 staff members, 2 full FTE in that area. So it doesn't take a lot of money. And yes, I guess would be the short answer.
Okay.
Brandon, some of these taxes on cigarette, liquor, and marijuana, why is the marijuana being budgeted a lot less, showing a negative compared to liquor or cigarettes, or they all increase?
Because of the
It's because of the,
proposition they passed.
Measure 110.
Yes, it cut into the.
It took money that the state was giving us from marijuana tax proceeds and shipped it off to drug programs. So the cities and counties across Oregon lost a significant chunk of money out of that. So we are seeing a lot less than we initially had been bringing in.
yeah. That was gonna say, if they're using liquor and cigarettes, I know they're using marijuana just as much.
The overall state revenues in that line are up over the last few years. It's just been reprogrammed.
Brandon, professional services keeps on going up. What is that for our IT?
No, professional services is gonna cover, and it depends on the department, but anything that we need to bring in outside support for, so that could be electrician, that could be an electrician, that could be somebody, not a contractor, but HVAC technician, somebody who we have to hire outside because we don't have that type of staff in-house.
It
Sure, I have
gets
one
more
question.
expensive every year.
Unfortunately, yes, but certainly costs aren't going down, unfortunately.
So Brendan, along that line, what professional services do the courts require?
Most of the professional services there is court-appointed attorneys.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question, just as Brandon. The way things are going right now, just the gas and fuel. Do you think that's gonna be enough? Maybe that would last me half a month.
Which line are we talking about?
Bottom of the view.
57. You might want to pay 57, you got 1,060 gas and fuel.
Yeah, I would say yes. If you look at the 2020 and the 2021 actuals, we're not near the $1,000 mark. So even over those actuals, it is higher than what we have used. So there is some wiggle
My
if
question is,
necessary.
gas is almost doubled.
Sure. I still think that's enough. So the line you're looking at specifically is for code compliance. They're primarily just driving around town. They're actually going to have a fuel efficient vehicle here soon. And so we believe that line is enough for the coming year. There are areas where we have added fuel costs, and you'll see that primarily for in like the police department's budget. We've added quite a bit to that line to give them a lot of flexibility as fuel costs are certainly undetermined. And we've tried to add some in most of the public works areas. But if their actuals didn't necessitate any additional monies, then we did not allocate any additional.
I figured that was for code enforcement, but I wasn't 100% sure. And like you say, it's the way prices fuel's going.
Sure, yeah. There was a question previously, Councilor Gerson asked this earlier that I failed to mention. The difference between professional service and technical service. We treat them, technical service is anything IT-based, IT in nature. So for example, our subscription costs for our email and Microsoft Office products, those are technical services. But if we're bringing in an electrician or an HVAC tech or somebody to do an analysis of some kind, that's going to be a professional service.
Brandon, also last year, we talked about credit card charges.
Yes.
I can't find.
Those are in the internal service fund. So when we get there, I can.
Did we come with a better pricing this time around, or?
We have made some significant changes in credit card processors. We are switching the city's bank as far as where our cash deposits are stored in a bid to lower those costs as much as possible. We're not overall sure yet what that's going to do. We've seen a significant increase in the amount of credit cards that we now process, certainly with the pandemic. We used to take in more cash than we do now. It used to be probably a 60-40 split in that we took 60% of our money was cash and the rest was checks and credit cards. And now we're over 2/3.
Does the city charge the customer a small fee?
We do not.
Because other places do charge, like if you wanted to call your electric bill in and you want to use a credit card, they charge you like $1.75, 85 cents. So that helps their costs. Maybe we should look into that to save some money, in the long run. We're talking thousands of dollars.
Sure. It certainly would be something that the council would have to make that determination as they set the fee schedule. But it hasn't been something so far that the city has wanted to pursue. Doesn't mean it could not happen.
Computers,
Yes.
desktops, laptops.
We are trying to shift more to mobile machines, so laptops. so that we are, in the event that we needed to, ready to pick up and go.
Big jump.
Where are you looking specifically? We are budgeting next year for a new server in this building. City Hall's server is 4 years old currently, 5 years next year, and our current IT contract with our third party requires that at 5 years, our IT items need to be replaced. So we are planning for a new server next year. Any other questions that I can answer about the general fund for you? All right, seeing and hearing no other questions, we'll move on to the Public Safety Fund. You will find this beginning on page 84 of your budget document and ending on page 93. In the Public Safety Fund, we have a few things to probably discuss. As many of you are likely aware, the police department has had, unfortunately, some significant vacancies over the last few years. Through no fault necessarily of their own, there are many that are getting out of law enforcement entirely. We've had only a couple move to other policing organizations in the state, but primarily it's been people moving on to other career fields. As a result, we are estimating that the beginning fund balance at the beginning of the 2023 fiscal year will be $3 million. That's enough fund balance to cover 12 months of expenditures for the police department. Right now, the targeted goal and the goal that council has set is a 6-month fund balance reserve in each of our funds that have personnel specifically. So this budget proposal reduces the public safety levy by 20%. We are asking not to take the full levy in the next fiscal year. Instead of the $7.85 that was approved by the voters, we are asking to reduce the levy rate to $6.30 per thousand. Approximately 85% of the taxable properties in Sweet Home would see that money returned to their pockets. The other 15% would see that money likely go to two taxing groups, the Sweet Home Library specifically, and the Lynn County law enforcement levy. And that's because those properties are still under compression. The average tax savings in a given year based on our taxable properties is about $170 a year per property owner. And that obviously goes up or down depending on the valuation of the property and any buildings and such on that property. So that's the biggest change for the public safety fund next year in this proposed budget. You will also see that property and liability costs labeled under the line insurance in this fund are up a significant amount. Our insurance provider, City County Insurance Services, has told us to expect a 12% increase in the property and liability rates for the coming fiscal year. That is the second year now of double-digit increases from CIS. As discussed previously, we've also budgeted additional funds for fuel for them in the event that gas prices stay where they are. In capital projects, I asked Jeff to swing for the fences on capital projects to help aid in his fund balance and to accomplish things that need to be done. And he did not disappoint. So what we are proposing next year is to replace the radio system repeater. So that would be the antenna that sits on top of their building, right, Jeff?
Yeah, no, it actually sits up on 50th Avenue.
Oh, 50th, okay. We're asking for $50,000 to replace a patrol vehicle. We are trying to replace one a year so that they get on somewhat of a normal replacement cycle. HVAC unit replacement, $60,000 would come from this fund. And that would cover what we think is one HVAC unit. That building is 22 years old. And so things are starting to fail. So we are going to start seeing some building costs as we go through the next several fiscal years. So we're asking for one HVAC unit on top of the building from this fund. Fuel station, I've put an asterisk by because I want to discuss that in another spot. But when we get there, know that the police department is proposed to cover $63,000 of that fuel station. And then the roof liner on top of the police department building is currently bubbling. And could provide for leak issues in the semi-near future. And so we are requesting to get that replaced. Any questions about the police department and the public safety fund?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, the last time we had this, the budget committee decided not to lower the money. I think that was a good idea. Now, the argument that you can have about not taking the full amount of the levy is that someone else is going to get that money. And you could argue that at some time down the road, that money might be needed. So that's a question that I have. I think that they do a really good job. I'm not saying, but what's going to happen after this next contract is up, because we don't know. I think you have an idea because you've gotten through some stuff, but anyway, so my concern would be I would love to have my taxes go down. Everybody would. But is the cost worth it, I guess, is what would be my question.
Sure.
To take money away that they already voted to have. And so I guess that's just my question. And whatever the budget committee and the council does is fine with me, but.
And if I could, I think what's presented here is just staff trying to be good stewards of the finances that we have in front of us. And so that's really what's down on paper is we believe would be, satisfactory to maintain the services we have. So that's simply our attempt to be the solid stewards and financially, fiscally responsible.
Well, I totally
Just stop
understand. You guys, you do a really good job. I'm not questioning any of that. I'm not. It just as some people might, like the budget committee last year, just said, no, we're not doing that because of what could happen down the road. So that's just my question.
Well, to add to Councilor Travis, Mr. Chair, I guess and one of the questions concerns, once you give it back, it may be hard to get it back. Now, I mean, that's where you're going with this, I think.
See, I agree with Dave because, we asked for that funds and it'd be nice, even if we don't use it, keep it in a reserve because we can't see into the future in case something came up with the police department or something and you needed some extra funds, we would have it. The voters voted for it. If they didn't want it, they wouldn't have voted for it. So yeah, like if you give it back to them and we have to play a roulette or something that this time, we give it back. Then the next time we're going to vote it back, they're going to say, what is it, guys? One moment you want the money, the next moment you're giving it back to us. Now you want to take it back from us. I just think we probably should keep it.
Mr. Chairman, so Brandon, if we lower this to a different level next year, this budget year, does that mean it's going to stay there?
No, so what staff has put together is a 5-year forecast. And if we were to lower this levy rate this year, we would slowly bring it back over time over that next 5 years. At the end of 5 years, we'd be sitting at 6 months of fund balance where council has said that that's where we'd like to target. And we still wouldn't be back to the full levy rate.
Okay, so
75.
what if it gets such a bad situation, which I'm sure it won't, I hope it won't, then we're gonna bring it back slowly, and then we could be in a mess again, and rather than bring it back all at the same time, that's not gonna look good, one way or the other.
So I think
Going
there's,
down is a great idea.
sure. I think that what we've asked the community for is funding to ensure that the police department can operate at its full capacity. And we can do that with a reduced levy. I think that if we were to take a shorter levy amount right now, and next year something happens, say property tax values fall through the floor. Hopefully not, certainly, but there is room for us to demonstrate that we are trying to be good stewards with citizen dollars, with taxpayer dollars. And so if we have to bring it back, we have a reason as to why we would need to bring it back. The economic forecast right now does not show things like property tax values falling through the floor. But yes, something could change. I mean, something could happen with this building next year that necessitates taking more than I have planned in my 5-year forecast. Because as much as I like to wish that I had a crystal ball, I don't. But I think this is being transparent. This is being good stewards with taxpayer dollars. And this says that if we need it, we will only take it if we need to take it.
Mr. Chairman, I think that that attitude of doing that is so different in this state that I think we would stand out and we would win some goodwill of our citizens if they know that we actually will return money when we don't actually need it. But that's my opinion. That's because I think that we can bring it back, and if they remember that we gave some money back, I think they would then vote for the next levy again, because they know our police department does a good job and they're willing to give it back if they don't need it.
Mr. Chairman, I also agree. I think that in the times the way they are right now, people are getting hit so hard with everything. And if the forecast is that we can still get by 5 years from now when the next levy comes up, I think it's good for the community to know that, like Susan said, that we're giving back to them. And I know Jeff can take care of what he takes care of. He wouldn't propose this at all if he didn't think he could take care of it. So I think it's a great idea.
Jeff, have you had any problems with other agencies trying to steal your officers? Because, you know, there's so many agencies out there willing to pay more money to get, because they're having problems getting staff. So, you know, they would like to get a person that's already seasoned and experienced, and they're paying some bigger dollars. So some of these officers, I know I'm hearing that they're leaving small agencies to go to a bigger agency because you're going to offer me $10,000 more or $20,000 more a year. You know, that makes them jump at, you know, money. And at that point, if you have to also jump and pay extra money, well, where are you getting that money?
Yeah, and yes and no to both of your points. We have had officers leave for our other agencies. One recently went to the Albany Police Department for a number of reasons. And so you have some valid points there. We are currently in negotiations right now with the next union contract. And so we've tried to come up with some, reflect some anticipations associated with what our liability would be. I'm not an accountant, but our liability would be associated with that new collective bargaining agreement. So we tried to build some of that in here. But to your point, absolutely, there's it's a kind of a dog-eat-dog world out there right now for law enforcement. You know, at one point in the recent past, there were 60 agencies hiring for police officers, and some of those multiple positions. So difficult to fill. So I understand your point, but we tried to build some of that into this budget as it's presented.
I have a question. So based off of other cities, how does our pay to the officers compared to others?
Well, we were actually just, like I mentioned, in our bargaining for the police department union. And I don't have those figures here. I guess I should have brought those, but we have a list of comparables that our city uses, and those comparables are based on a number of factors, and we use them all across the bargaining units, which would be population size, budget size, kind of regional, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, some regional locations of it, And based on our comparables, we have 10 comparables and we're pretty close right to the middle of it. And so that's actually what we're dealing with right now is with the union, trying to figure out where the happy spot?
The happy
The happy
So
medium.
my next question is like, I know I have law enforcement in my family and
Mhm.
some cities have, you know, like hiring bonuses and stuff like that. Do we have anything like that in place?
We currently have a hiring incentive for certified officers. So if a certified officer was come, a hiring
lateral.
incentive, like a lateral, yes. You know, and that's what we've actually been talking a lot about. How can we incentivize individuals to come here? Because quite honestly, and we're kind of down a rabbit hole here, but when we hire somebody, if we can't get that individual to move to Sweet Home and actually become a part of the community, we're far less likely to keep them long-term. And so that's really what we're trying to figure out. And if you've looked at the housing market in Sweet Home, it's not easy to do right now. I mean, there's not a lot of options for even a young individual or an older individual coming into town to actually find somewhere to.
Yeah, most of them just live in the neighboring city. They don't really live in their own city. But so wouldn't that be something that we can use the extra levy money for?
It could potentially, based on some of that, you know, like those hiring incentives or to draw people would probably be somewhat of a council decision. I'm thinking just off the top of my head, wouldn't necessarily have to be in a collective bargaining agreement.
Right.
Thoughts on that, anybody?
I think that'd be a great thing for the city council to work on. And the next thing is, I see on here the training and travel money, which is 14,500. Is that like firearms training, like qualifications, or do you have to do that at DPSST? Or is that like travel expenses? I mean, what does all that mean?
Most of that's broken down into travel expenses and actually the cost of any associated training. So it's not, doesn't account for personnel costs, things like that. And our firearms range does it come out of a different item? I'd have to, I don't actually have that answer.
I think it comes out of the training,
Okay.
but the membership, if you have, for like the range masters and stuff, comes out of the membership.
So actually it would be, you're correct. The membership, the ARTP.
Oh, ARPC?
ARPC comes out of the membership. And then all the wages, benefits associated with the officers going are just covered in under the salaries, personnel expenses.
Why not like, you know, ammunition and all that
That's all
stuff?
in a separate item. Yeah.
So the 9,000, is that cover all the roof repairs, that kind of thing that's necessary? On page 92, you have building repair and maintenance. You mentioned that the roof was having problems.
Correct. And those are just for various other issues that may come up. We have
So $9,000 would cover things like if a doorknob needed to be
Yeah.
replaced or, you know, small minor expenditures, just general maintenance. The actual building upgrades that we're talking about, such as the roof and stuff, is coming out of the capital outlay item,
Okay,
up above, then toward the top of page 92.
okay. Oh, I see. So
Oh, good.
I'm actually kind of of the mind that stability is nice for our citizenry, that rather than drop down and possibly come back up and not knowing what the potential gas could end up being, which could be kind of crazy here in the next few months. That if you want to adjust your budget, if we can just try to get it like this as much as possible so that the consumers aren't seeing high spikes and up and down, would be in our best interest, because I do want to be a good steward of the money, but I also know that it's really hard for them to foresee what taxes are going to be on their properties, and that jumping up and down is very difficult for them. It's better to just have it consistent across the board as much as possible. So.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want people to think that I'm against cutting this. I don't want people to say that. I already think that I'm saying that, because it's not, it's a good thing to do. But the fear is down the road, and, you know, you go down and then you go back up, you know, in however much that would be. My next question I ask you every year, is your training enough money?
I believe so at this point in time. We haven't ran out in the years past. And so we really had I expect our training budget to increase, this year and moving forward a little bit to probably expend down most of that line item, simply because over the last 2 years, there hasn't been a lot of training. Most of the training's been online because of the pandemic. So we haven't been able to send people to a lot of training.
I have one more question for you, Brandon, now. So if he uses $12,000, that stays in there, and do we deduct that from the next year from 14.5 to, whatever that difference in number would be? Because it's going to carry over. Is that not true?
Sure, so the money stayed,
Okay.
any available fund balance left at the end of this
Yeah,
next year
yeah.
would stay there.
I just want to make sure everybody knew that that's what happens. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. So Brandon, I actually agree with Councilor Coleman that I think it's a good idea to give the money back if we don't really need it at this point. But my question is, the voters approved a specific amount. So when you talk about getting it back little by little, I'm not sure how that would work, how you would do that.
Sure.
And whether it would really be a good idea. If we give it up, so to speak, can we manage without getting it back?
So there's a couple ways to answer that. First off, as far as this body, actually, the budget committee gets to set the property tax rate that is levied. We have authorization as a city to go up to $7.85, but the city's not required to levy that full amount. So if the budget committee decided to levy the $6.30 that's proposed here, you could next year go to 645 or 655 or whatever levy rate was necessary to maintain the operations of the department. That's up to each annual budget committee to make that determination. But we would not lose any ground as far as we're still always authorized to levy up to that 785.
Thank you.
So this, Mr. Chairman, this reminds me years ago, well, we raised the water prices and then we lowered the water. See, that's when I was on council, we did that. And so I didn't see anybody complaining about that because we raised them, then we lowered them. And now the water prices are low, but now we're getting the money back because of the sewer. So they said my water prices have gone way down because we raised them and then slowly when we got everything going, we lowered them. Then we raised the sewer prices. So now my water is probably $20, $30 more than it used to be. Water prices are down, but sewer is up. So it's kind of comparable to me. I mean, people understand when you lower something, whether they voted for it or not. This was a city council thing when we lowered the water price and then raised it again. So I don't see how giving people back their money, even though they proposed for it, and just as they don't really need it this year, I mean, they love, it's sort of a luxury to them, that why not use that money and keep using something else?
Because, I like to get extra money back, but, you give them the money back, then they're gonna think, what are they gonna raise then? If they're giving me this money back, what is going to get raised for the part of the money that they gave me back, but the money that they gave me, they're gonna raise something that's gonna be actually more than what they're giving me back.
So I have a question. Does the county get a bigger part of that money if we don't take it?
So for 15% of the properties in Sweet Home, yes, the county would get a bigger portion. The 85% of the properties in Sweet Home are outside of, we are estimating will be outside of the compression next year, which means that no, the county would not see those proceeds. They would go back to the property owner
On 85%.
on 85%.
Thank you.
That's a substantial amount.
And a majority of that 85% is residential properties because a lot of for example, our downtown core still has fairly high compression rates. We were looking at those recently for something else. So a lot of that 85% is going to be in residential property. properties.
Do we know what the average is going to be, what that would look like on your taxes?
It would be on average, because it's hard to guess, but I just took the total taxable value. It would be about $170 a year for a property owner.
Given inflation.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make it clear why we raised the wastewater fund. We're getting in the weeds here. We raised it because we had to.
Sure.
That wasn't a question. It wasn't even, we had to because of the situation we're in with the wastewater. And if we didn't do that, we don't get money from anybody else.
And the last
And
wastewater
water was
increase.
The water was a choice that we didn't need the water fees at that time, and that's why we ordered. And I'm done with that, so we should be moving on, I think.
Are there any other questions, comments about the police department and the public safety fund?
I just want to say you're doing a great job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, then I will move to the next section of your budget book, starting on page 94, and this one's gonna go through page 101. This is the library services fund. Again, this, the primary revenue source for the library is an operating levy. I'm not proposing any changes to the library levy, which I will highlight here in a second as to why. Actually, I guess now. The budget focus for the library in the coming fiscal year, and has been now for a couple of years actually, is on preparing for a potential new library. We've had some initial conversations about a new library. There's still some work that would need to be done as far as, council review and approval of a new library. But this budget proposal sets aside a significant chunk of dollars to start that process. Based on community feedback, library, what's that board? Library
Advisory board.
advisory board, thanks, I couldn't think of the advisory word. And some initial conversations with the city council. We have proposed $100,000 in this budget for an architect to begin kind of preliminary drawings of what a new library might look like once we find a location for it. And we have budgeted $290,000 in transfers out, which would go to the project and equipment reserve. A fun little piece of information at the end of the next fiscal year with this proposal, the library would be sitting on $1.2 million in project money that could be used towards a new library. So we've done a lot of work at making sure that if that comes to fruition, there is money at least to get us started. And then we can move forward from there.
Question, Mr. Chair. Does that include that donation?
That's,
Okay, I just want to check.
so for those who are not aware, there was a property in Colorado that the trust document stated that a third of the proceeds for the sale of that Colorado property would be donated to the Sweet Home Public Library. Those funds we've received a portion of them to date. We are still waiting on the last distribution after they complete their tax filings for the year. And we are putting that in the project and equipment reserve.
Mr. Chairman, you've heard the thing about fair share. I'm kidding. The library, this is a good thing that we're not doing anything for that, because if you've been in the library, you know what it is and what it could be. So I agree with not cutting that at all. Maybe we can do a share.
Everything else in this budget is business as usual for the library. There are no staff changes, no major increases in overall expenditures. Megan, for those of you who have not yet met Megan Daisy is our new library director. New, because she started last August, but she's been hard at work at kind of replenishing library resources. And we've tried to give her as much money in this next year's budget as possible to continue to do the great work that the library has done for so many years.
I know that you give a lot of money because I drop off a lot of packages to her every day. not to go back to the levy, but the library also falls under that levy money. If you gave money back to, would that also take money away from the library or not?
No, we are proposing to leave the library's levy, so they're two separate levies. We're proposing to leave theirs at $1.17. In the event that the police department's levy is reduced, the library may actually see a small increase in property tax revenues from that 15% of properties that are not outside compression. Because the tax distribution would kind of net them some additional. So it would actually benefit the library in some small portion. It's about, of the overall, if it's say it's $150, the library would see a third of that extra money, and the county would see 2/3. That's a rough estimate, so.
I have another travel and training thing. Is that big enough for you?
Yeah, we did increase it slightly, but most of the training for libraries has switched to online, and a lot of that's going to remain online.
And are we buying a new chair?
You don't like my chair? Yeah, we've got new chairs for everybody.
25, oh, for all of you. Okay, I can live with that. Okay. And so we haven't lunched a lot for food and beverage?
Most of that is for programs. Like right now, they're having a community reads program, and we are offering like cookies. So it's just stuff like that, especially for teenagers. It gets people to the library.
Bribery.
Incentives. We don't bribe you here.
And some, especially some of the, I've been over, the kids were there and the fire station would bring over an engine and stuff, and that's pretty cool for the kid. They all get out there and try to put their boots on and all those things. And that's a good thing too. So it's a very, very small area, very small, and there's no way to put anything bigger. It just isn't. So
Not on
let's
this.
keep this with you.
Mr. Chair, just a quick question, as curiosity more than anything. Was everything going to TV or internet, and why there's a reduction versus previous 9,000, 6,000? If everything's going to the internet and TV and all that, you'd think that would go up and because
I-
most of the internet, like your service companies, they're always increasing their fees. They're not giving it away. I'm wondering why it's less.
I believe that was the purchase of the TV.
No, so that's the TV and internet service, so that specifically, that's their internet provider. I don't remember. Please hold. Missed that one. Megan will have to apparently make some adjustments from another line to make up for the fact that she needs probably $1,500 more for internet charges for the next year. Without some kind of adjustment.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's your fault.
It likely is, yes.
Yes.
I'll own that one.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Good catch, yeah.
Christy did tell me today that not every budget is perfect, and I did believe her. But we had not yet found where it was not perfect. Counselor Trask has found the not perfect.
Isn't it Mayor Mall?
It was.
Oh, sorry, Mayor Mueller.
I really don't like you putting it on her instead of you because,
No, I said she pointed out that not every budget is perfect.
well, she shouldn't have had to do that.
Are there any additional questions about the library that any of us can answer for you? All right, I will move on to page 102 in your book. And this section is gonna go through page 105. Project and Equipment Reserve is a shared fund. Departments transfer out of their related budgets and into the Project and Equipment Reserve to save for various things. Right now, the library, as you heard, is saving for a potential new library. The police department has been setting money aside that we will actually discuss here shortly. Public Works has been setting money aside as well, primarily for the replacement of vehicles. So we have, over the last 4 years, made a very hard push at budgeting reserves so that by the time a vehicle has met its useful life, we can replace it with cash instead of either leasing those vehicles or extending their life and spending more money on maintenance in the long run. So that's primarily what the Project and Equipment Reserve is for. On the screen, I am outlining what we anticipate the reserve fund to look like at the end of this current fiscal year that ends on June 30. You'll notice that the Community and Economic Development Department is sitting in the red. I should have highlighted it. But that was a council approved expenditure a couple of years ago for them to purchase a new pickup after the code compliance vehicle that was being used was supposedly out of commission due to a transmission that needed a new transmission. And at $4,000, when the value of the vehicle was $3,500, we said that's not really a good use of city cash. So anyways, we purchased a new vehicle. The agreement was that they would repay that, we repay their debt in that fund over the next 5 years. So they are currently working on that to be repaid soon. The library will have 861,000, the police department 241,000, and Public Works almost $750,000. We do have some budget in this fund proposed for the next fiscal year, specifically some vehicle payments on the Public Works side. So $16,000 for vehicles. Those payments are existing today. Let's talk about the fuel station for a second. This is a relatively large request. We are requesting, I think it's about I think we budgeted $250,000 across all various funding sources across the city to build a fuel station. This will serve multiple purposes. The first purpose and most important purpose is an emergency preparedness instance. This would allow the city to have fuel on hand in the event that something happens here, that we can't get fuel from stations or can't get fuel deliveries. This would provide us with fuel for an extended period of time. If something were to happen today, the police department has about 3 days of fuel in its vehicles, and then they'd be out. And we would be up a creek. Or they'd be riding a bike. So this, from an emergency preparedness standpoint, this would help us prepare for some kind of disaster situation. This would also help in overall cost because we could get the fuel cheaper than what we currently pay for it because we pay for a premium through another company. And so this would allow us to get fuel at a different rate and have it on hand. The proposal as it stands right now is that the city would provide a majority of the funding. So the police department you saw had, I think it was $63,000 budgeted in their fund to cover this cost. The Project and Equipment Reserve would cover Public Works, their contribution to this, $138,000. The other approximately $50,000 would come from the fire district. And we've had that conversation with them. They are on board with that. So they are putting that into their budget plan for the next fiscal year as well. Once that fuel station is here, we would be able to kind of expand its use to keep fuel circulating. The current thought process would be that other government agencies in the area would be able to use that fuel and provide us with some ongoing revenue stream for the use of that fuel. So potentially the school district for their buses, potentially ODOT would want to tap into that. And that would allow us to to cycle the fuel so that we're not sitting on old fuel in those tanks when we need it the most. So it would also provide for kind of regular shipments so that that tank is fairly full on a regular basis, so that it is ready when we need it for that emergency situation that may arise. So,
Chairman. While this is being researched, did you check in or check the possibility of using the Lynn County fueling station out of town here? Now, the Lynn County Road Department supplies all the gas for the Lynn County Sheriff's Department, the bus system in Albany, of course, all of their own vehicles, and they have, you know, a huge contract of for these fueling stations. And it might be a way to save some money rather than build one ourselves.
so I don't know the answer to that. I don't know where the nearest county fuel station might be around here, if there is one at their maintenance shop here in just outside of town. This idea kind of originated with the police department and was something that Public Works has been interested in as well. So I'll kind of let Jeff talk to that.
And really much of this, this concept started about 6 to 8 years ago when we first started discussing it and looking at different options. The key difference is to keep it in-house, and so we control it in a emergency situation. That way we control our own fuel supply, and we control who has access to it if we do have to start rationing or something such as that. Whereas if we're reliant on just others, you know, we may lose that ability of controlling that. And so the aspect of coming together with a number of different agencies was just appealing so that we could lower the cost and really have a turnkey service for our fleets for the emergency response.
Mr. Chair, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think didn't the sheriff's department pull away from the county shops on their fuel? I'd have
I
to check
don't
on
know
that. I think
that. I
they
don't know.
have. I know other communities that are doing fuel stations too. It's a very good idea. It really is. Just for the very point.
Mr. Chairman, so are we gonna have tanks the size of those out there toward Foster on the left-hand side that the log trucks use and the gas people? Are they gonna be that big? Because we're gonna have to have diesel and regular fuel.
Right.
So that's pretty big tanks. I'm for this, by the way. But it's gonna be a pretty good sized tank if you have a diesel and a gas together.
There are a couple of options that we're looking on the table. Is refurbishing a tank that's currently at Public Works, if you know the large tank there, refurbishing that to an expense. But if that is, we had that looked at about 3 years ago. Depending on the cost of that, is it cheaper to partner with a fuel company and have them supply the tanks in at a little surcharge for the truckloads of fuel that come in. So those are just I guess some fine details that haven't actually been worked out until we know if this is a project that we could proceed with.
And I'm just guessing we're gonna have tanks above ground.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got to have a place where the fuel can be caught.
Right.
So I know you guys have all that done. I know.
And a lot of this we're very preliminary in this. We have done some initial research to get a budget estimate for the purpose of this process, but have not, like, as Chief alluded to, have not really gone down the rabbit hole on that yet until we know that this is something that the budget committee and the community want to support.
So Brandon, Chief, have we looked at adding an electrical charging station? Because there isn't one in Sweet Home. And this might be an opportunity to do that.
I'm gonna have to have somebody else answer that.
So we had had initial discussions within City Hall to evaluate potentially adding an electrical charging station, whether it be here at City Hall or somewhere else. I wouldn't say that we're anywhere near completion on that, but preliminary conversations have started on that, yes. Because there are a lot of grants out there, though, sometimes it does apparently come with a need to provide some capital up front before you can really get it in the ground. So I know there's interest. I know that others have looked into electrical options as well semi-recently. But we're still having that conversation here to figure out what we'd be able to do and where we would put it that would make sense. If we put it here at City Hall, what are they gonna do while their vehicle is charging? They can come visit us. We love visitors at City Hall, for the record. But is that really what people want to do? So we're still kind of working on it.
Yeah, from a private sector, two pumps, 2 charge stations and $58,000.
We might be able to get a green grant to do part of it.
Part of it.
We already have somebody using the fuel down there now, don't we? The buses that go to Albany, do they fill up there?
They use the propane that's currently on
Oh,
site. They
okay.
have a propane
Okay.
systems there.
Okay. I like the in-house fuel because you don't have to have man hours to drive a vehicle to Albany or something to fill up. It'd be nice to have our own because then we're at the top of the list in case we have problems, because if you have to go to Albany, they're gonna use Albany first before Sweet Home if there was an emergency, so if we have our own, then we're at the top of the list to make sure our city provided before, sure, we want to help other people out, but we want to make sure we're helped out as well. So, like every other city, most major cities do have a fuel.
And in the end, after the initial expense and recovering that expense, the fuel is significantly cheaper when you're buying it by a truckload
Yep.
than it is at the pump. So now that's, again, that's years and years from recovering that expense. So there is a savings on some level of that.
I think there'd be a huge return on investment on that. So as a business standpoint, I think us making revenue out of that and lowering our costs is a huge plus. It's a no-brainer.
Yes. It would definitely work. Is this something we're talking about doing right now, or is it just a proposal for a year or two away?
If the budget committee approves and the council adopts this budget, then we would do it in the next fiscal year. It would go in sometime in 2023.
Where's the proposed location for this?
That's a good question. We've had numerous conversations about where this could potentially land, with some of the changes happening at the Public Works Yard. We're a little concerned about space there as to whether or not it would actually fit feasibly there. Conversations have included, none of this has gone to council yet, for the record, so don't hold me to anything here on this. But staff has talked about the property behind City Hall here as a potential location because of the ability to go in and out. We still need to solidify a location.
I was concerned about the public works because it's in the floodplain.
Also true.
But I'm for this idea, completely for this idea.
And one last use that we're not thinking about is we're speccing a generator at the water treatment plant right now. We're also siting a larger generator at the wastewater treatment plant. In the event that we have outages and we need to bring fuel, that would be fuel within a couple blocks away. We can get a Buffalo that keeps us under that level of, I think it's like 499 gallons that you can legally tow. And we can keep those generators running with fuel on hand. So just throw that in too.
I just want to recommend that we have more than one tank. I don't want to be at the bottom end of this tank after this investment when a disaster strikes. I'd like to have a full tank. So just putting it out there.
And that was part of the idea for having others utilize the fuel so that we'd have a regular replacement and keep that tank fairly full. I don't think we'd ever see it dip below half, maybe. I don't know. A lot of that stuff's worked out.
Next year's budget, right?
So, yes.
So do we have to
No,
decide
it's,
on that,
it's
or-
in the budget, so unless you all have major concerns, which I'm not hearing a lot of, we'll leave it there, and if it gets approved, then.
I, for one, sound like don't know where to put it yet. You haven't decided on tanks much and maybe you take half of it and decide where you want to do with it and do it next year full bore.
So part
I
of,
mean,
I-
right now.
Some of this project would be, either you dive in or you don't dive in, because a lot of it, whether you have to acquire tanks or refurbish the tank, but there's also a card lock system that is fairly expensive that would come with that, so you could track what agency, what department is using what fuel out of that. And so to piecemeal it together, I think would be a lot more difficult, and may not see some of that.
and our public works staff has discussed tank sizes. I think we're down at this point to where is it going to be housed and what card lock system would we potentially use. We're fairly far along without getting to the point where we need to get blessings yet. Location is probably the last major hurdle that we have.
Also, it's like, if you buy something today, next year it's gonna be higher. So,
Yeah.
You gotta think of the dollar.
We've also
And I
been,
like, to jump in it. If we're gonna jump in it, let's do it because next year it's gonna be higher.
we've also been told that, for example, getting the tanks themselves is 6 to 9 months out.
Mr. Chair, can we do a thumbs up on this and keep moving?
I see thumbs up. Okay. One thing that I am asking for the budget committee to review and potentially approve as a change to our proposal is adding $200,000 to this budget to replace additional HVAC units on the police department building. We built our budget with the plan to replace at least one that was on a regular fritz over the report writing room in the police department. And then went to have a court session the other day to find the room at 55 degrees, a balmy 55 degrees.
Sweaters.
It's called cold. Come to find out that the HVAC unit, so there are 6 HVAC units on the top of the police department. The one above the conference room there had, in fact, decided it didn't want to participate in life anymore. So we are asking for you to budget what the police department has in its reserve, 200,000. That would leave about $40,000 in there to replace vehicles in the long run, as we are currently trying to do. But that would also allow them to replace additional units if it's determined that it would be better for them to replace all of them at once. If they don't have to replace all of them at once, they're certainly not going to, but this would give them the flexibility if that were to arise. So I am asking for that one change in your budget.
It's covered in the budget. They have enough money.
There's enough money there, yes.
Okay, let's go.
The police department has 241,000, so I'm just asking for 200. Later. Any other questions about the project and equipment reserve?
Would that go under capital outlay?
Yes, we put that under probably buildings. Well, I think we'd add it to buildings. It's a value to the building itself.
Okay, improvements, okay.
All right, page 106 in your budget document. I'm only gonna touch on this one because it's in there and I didn't necessarily want to overlook it and have somebody ask me why. The Narcotics Fund, we are not budgeting any expenditures for next year. There is money in that fund. The police department has used it in the past for things like a detective's vehicle, minor odds and ends related to really the detective's area. So no planned expenditures for next year. I put it in here so you could see.
Couldn't you come up with a better name?
That has actually, so somebody else asked me that as well. That's been the name since long before I got here.
Yeah.
And somebody did ask if we would consider a name change for that fund because it's a negative connotation these days. That would be the responsibility really of the budget committee if you wanted to rename that fund to something else.
Sure.
So if somebody has an idea, we could certainly talk about it. Maybe think about that and we can talk about it tomorrow. what you might want to rename that fund to, but yes, that has been actually brought up recently. That's the first time I heard it in 4 years.
Mr. Chairman, Brandon, are we still doing our vehicles through enterprise?
Yes, we are.
Okay, just to clarify.
If there are no questions about that, we will move to the Internal Service Fund. You can find this beginning on page 108 of your budget book. And this stretches to page 133. Similar to the general fund, the summary, the entire Internal Service Fund is provided in the first several pages. And then you have a department breakdown as you go through the other pages in that section. In the Internal Service Fund, some of the major highlights for the year include an increased cost for the city manager salary and benefits. That is something that the city council reviewed at their last council meeting and approved of the new salary range. So that's included in this budget. The professional services line in the executive section. So that's the account codes is 290-003 is what is executive in there. But the professional services there includes an extra 25,000 for external attorney services, and that's specifically for labor relations type stuff. Which we typically farm out right now. And then also the other major change in the executive area is that the IT expenses are reallocated from personnel down to materials and services line, specifically technical services. As we did not hire an individual this year, but rather expanded our contract with our third party to provide additional IT services for us. In the finance department, there are no changes to the overall FTE in the department, but there are additional costs to change one of our accounting technician positions to an accountant. So it's a classification change. The total cost to that change is about $10,000. Additionally, we have moved 0.05 FTE of the finance director back from municipal court over to the Internal Service Fund. So 95% of the finance director's salary and benefits will be paid for out of the Internal Service Fund, 5% out of the general fund, specifically the court section. In the non-departmental section, so 290-002. Labor relations expenditures, we moved those from the general fund to the Internal Service Fund. Labor relations next year is primarily going to be our contract with the General Services Union, or AFSCME, does expire at the end of 2023, June 2023. So we will see some labor relations expenditures as we negotiate that new contract. And then, sorry for my voice, down in the public works section, so accounts that are 290-009. We have added 95% of the staff engineer to the public works admin budget, which you'll find there on the screen, 290-009-480-110. The primary reason for that is just to align the salary and benefits with more along the lines of what the individual in that job is doing. Those expenses are then billed out to various public works areas because here, so they operate here out of City Hall, but they provide services by working with customers on utility locations, SDC calculations. I don't really have a full listing, but if you did have questions about it, Blair can certainly answer those for you. But we did move that from the general fund, specifically the KED budget. That's all I have for the Internal Service Fund. I'm ready for your questions.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. So, under 290002, at the bottom of page 114, we have codification of ordinance.
Yes.
Is that our new code book thing what we're working on?
Yeah.
So is $5,000 enough?
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm right back to the same thing. I get confused when you keep on going technical services on me with IT services and your new contract and your non-new contract. So personal services is 33 and the other one over here is 126 for technical. Is that part of the agreement with the IT?
The 126 is part of the agreement with the IT company. That's in the technical services line, that's where you'll find so Step Up is our third-party provider.
Right.
That's where those charges are built in.
And you can sever that with them anytime.
Yeah, we have to, it's a 30-day notice.
Mhm.
But yes, we could sever that.
Found
if it
anybody
wasn't
comparable?
reimbursed. I'm sorry.
Found anybody comparable? I know you've been searching for a while.
We did, we went through a search to hire a person. What the city ultimately determined, we were then approached by Step Up with this option. We get up to 20 hours a week of priority service with them. And so we can over here to the server room and knock on the door and ask the IT person to fix something. We don't really need much more than that is what we've discovered. We don't have a need for a full-time person. I'd kind of be wasting somebody's time and wasting city dollars if I were to hire a full-time person right now. So this has actually worked for us.
20 hours a week for 120.
Well, and then that includes, so then they also provide our existing managed service. They're our managed service provider. So that includes our network support, all of our general IT needs.
Gotcha.
It's all included in that 126.
Gotcha.
Good on questions.
Hmm?
I think we're good on questions.
Seeing and hearing no questions. This part, what we are looking for is committee action on whether or not the city should receive state revenue sharing funds
Oh, no, I don't want any money.
for general purposes. So in your budgets, you saw these dollars budgeted in the general fund. They go to support various services in the general fund. That's what we do with those dollars that we receive from the state. So it just needs the committee's blessing before we can move to the next step or not. You could choose not to, certainly. But this is where I kind of butt out.
Need a roll call on that?
After a motion is made.
I'll make a motion to receive state revenue sharing funds.
Me too.
Roll call.
All agree?
Yes, because we all agree.
Counselor Gorley,
Yes.
Counselor Coleman,
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Muller,
Yes.
Counselor Gerson,
Yes.
Counselor Trask,
Yes.
Bob Brianna,
Yes.
Josh Dorstad,
Yes.
Kenneth Hamlin,
Yes.
David Bowman.
Yes.
Looks like we have recognition of visitors in the public comment period. There's a letter submitted.
I do have a letter that was submitted that was asked to be read in the record. Okay. The City of Sweet Home Budget Committee, this letter is regarding the proposed 3% cost of living adjustment for unrepresented employees of the City of Sweet Home. Last year, unrepresented employees were on track for rate hourly to receive a 5.45% increase, while represented employees were receiving a 1.25% cost of living adjustment. This was sent to City Council, who determined that unrepresented employees received a 1.25% increase along with represented employees. Represented employees appreciated this very much and felt that this showed that council and management value their staff. This also followed past practices where increases were the same across the board. We have worked very hard to rebuild the relationship between management and union members and feel that it is imperative that this practice continue to keep increases fair and equitable for all. Please reconsider the proposed 3% COLA and increase this to equal the 3.25% that represented employees will be receiving effective July 1st, 2022. Thank you for your consideration of this request, and please know that we all appreciate the time and effort
you are contributing to our budget process. Sincerely, Angela Hillwell, Ask Me Local 3337 President.
Now, I talked to Christie about this, and this is a union that's asking us to give you folks more money? Is that what I'm hearing? Like, for instance, Brandon and Blair and the chief and the library person and everybody else that's not under a union?
Again,
Yeah, me too. I'm okay. So is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that is yes, that is correct. That is what the request is. And that's one of the great things I love about working for the city of Sweet Home is that our staff supports each other and they support the council and the community and they are leaders in the community. So this is really telling about our staff and wanting to support each other. It's very unusual to receive a request like this. And just for your information, it's not normally one that the budget committee would undertake. The compensation is set by our city council as part of their annual process. Generally, this does come as a recommendation from the city manager. And that's one of the toughest things that you have to do as a manager is make recommendations because you do value the staff and the contributions that they make to your community and your city. But you're balancing that with how it's perceived in the public, how much money we have available. And when we were preparing our budget this year, this is what we felt we could afford. But this is something that if the budget committee wants to have a conversation about it, and certainly feel free to make a recommendation to the council, but it would ultimately be a council decision at a later date.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to talk to the mayor here for a minute. I think that we have tried, and the ones that have been on the council for a while, I think we've tried to make that equal as much as we could. Now, if you weren't here before, you probably might not know that the staff didn't take a raise for a certain amount of time to help with the situation we were in. And so I am absolutely for this. So that's just me.
I served on the Lynn County Compensation Advisory Board, and that's what they recommended this year too, is to try to keep it even. I think it's a great idea. I think it's also an honor to have that kind of staff working here, but also that they value the leadership that much as well.
Well, and they're doing a really good job. They shouldn't be, that's true. I've said enough.
So on the practical side, what are we looking at money wise? Apparent, approximately the cost. Do that.
Well, Brendan, we were going through the budget earlier. I think that you quoted me a $20,000 cost, but
I think so.
there's 16 unrepresented staff, I believe, 16 or 17. And so the total cost to the city would be in that neighborhood.
Approximately 20,000.
That's all, $20,000.
That's money well spent in my book.
I'm all
20 grand for 16 people?
I'm all for it. I agree with Councilor Gerson. I think that is money well spent, so. it's not
Actually, this conversation already came before council, and I don't think there's any council that was against it, so.
Yeah.
Everybody was on board with it. We've already had this discussion. Your letters coming after the fact, it's just before council. I'm full support of it.
Yep. City council.
Brandon, it sounds like we have some budget numbers to change.
So with that and with the 200,000, unless that isn't something that the committee wants to entertain, we will provide you with updated worksheets so that you can see what those budgetary impacts are.
Tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fast.
I think so. Almost.
I keep hearing people say tomorrow. Did we have a budget committee?
Yeah.
We're back here at 6 o'clock tomorrow.
I thought it was the 21st.
No, it was, and then at the last committee meeting, we had to move it
Sorry.
because there's a planning commission meeting already that day.
Okay.
So,
And how long do you propose that to take? Can we keep it to an hour?
I don't anticipate it going longer than what it's happened right now.
Hour and a half.
You do have a little bit more meat and there is some weighty topics that you will likely dive into tomorrow. But it all depends on your questions, really.
Greg
There's
makes
not,
it a mess.
there's no additional content as far as what we talked about.
Spends a lot of money.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, it's public works series. For those of you who are unaware, it's mainly public works tomorrow.
How much do we have? Just public works tomorrow? What else?
So we're gonna try and finish this up tomorrow. So in your books, that would be everything from page 139, 434 down to 199, 198. Light reading before you go to bed tonight. Exhilarating reading, I should add.
Weird.
I will say, Brendan, it's a lot easier to read this year. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
except for the size of the letters.
Oh, sorry. I can print you a bigger book.
I do have a question though, for Brandon's email saying that somebody wanted to see the March as of up to date version of the budget,
Oh, yes.
all 70 pages of it. Who? I guess I don't want to know who did that, but 70 pages, I'm going to the email, I'm like, oh, I started printing off and I looked at 1, 2, and then it said 270, and no.
I'm reviewing it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get that.
All right.
Crazy.
Is everything good? We adjourned?
Yeah, crazy.
All right. Adjourned at 7:36. All right.
All 70 pages.
Hey, surprise!
Some people love their numbers.
I'm retarded? Yes, I am. Yeah, hey, it's good for coming. Good night. No, I'm retarded. I'm done. I'm done with my place of employment. I'm done with the
I
car.
actually like to listen to what you say too, so that I don't